Hello, today is Monday, March 9th, and welcome to episode 567 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI founder and executive director Jamil Jaffer. I'm joined today by advisory board member Lester Munson, senior fellow Andy Kaiser, and fellow Mark Raimondi. So folks, we're talking yet once again on this podcast about Iran and the ongoing conflict between the United States and Israel on one side and Iran on the other. Actually, I guess it's a lot more than Israel and the U.S. on one side, because Iran, for the last 7 to 10 days or 8 days now, has been attacking its neighboring countries, whether it's Qatar or Oman or the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. They've all been hit by Iranian strikes, notwithstanding the fact that the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, went on TV over the weekend, apologized for these very strikes, and then yet hours later, there were strikes once again. And so off we go. So we'll debate that question, the question about whether these strikes are appropriate, what the purpose is, whether they're trying to draw the U.S.'s Arab allies into the fight or not. What's exactly going on here? Other news over the weekend include the fact that Israel hit Iran's oil depots, the first attack on their energy infrastructure, so a big deal there. A number of large explosions shown over the weekend in Tehran or the outskirts of Tehran. And then, of course, we have the latest announcement by the Iranian Assembly of Experts in the city of Qum, the holy city of Qum, announcing that they have selected a new supreme leader. No surprise, it's the son of the former supreme leader, Ali Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei. So he's viewed as something of a hardliner, or perhaps even more of a hardliner than his father. There were rumors circulating that his father did not want his son selected, and yet we're off to the races with that as well. So let me start with you, Les. What do you make of all these developments over the weekend? One, the apology, but maybe not so much apology from the president, the attack by Israelis on the energy infrastructure, and the selection of Mojtaba Khamenei.
Well, I wonder, Jamil, if there's an opportunity for our side to push against the idea of a hereditary leadership change in Iran. That seems like a vulnerability to me. So I hope our folks who are working on this kind of thing use that to maximum advantage. I think the President Pezeshkian pronouncement of a few days ago that was like immediately revealed to be utterly useless and irrelevant is illustrative of the fact that the so-called elected president of Iran has always been irrelevant, and there's other people who are calling the shots inside Iran. And this is something that I think most of us on this call, perhaps all of us on this call, have been saying for a long time, that the other side would say, well, there's this democracy in Iran. Yes, they would vote on kind of a person to be president, but it didn't actually impact Iranian decision making. And so I think that was just kind of immediately revealed. Somehow no one commented on it. I do think there's interesting questions about what the U.S. goals are, and our leadership, President Trump and others, have been saying different things on different days. I think, to me, it's pretty clear we're trying to destroy all of the tools of the regime, whether they're the nuclear weapons program or the missile program, or the ability to support proxy forces in the region. I think that's what our real goal is here. It's not so much about who's actually in charge. It's more about what the capacity they would have to impact their neighbors in the long run. But we'll see what happens, as they say.
Well, Andy, is that right? Is Les right that it doesn't matter who's in charge in Iran? Because President Trump, when he first launched his attack, called the Iranian people, when the time was right, for them to rise up and replace their leadership, saying it was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. They weren't going to have the opportunity again. So it seemed like, at least at the outset, it mattered a lot to President Trump who was in charge in Iran. And in fact, just over the weekend, maybe contrary to Lester's point, President Trump once again put out a Truth Social saying that the Iranian government, the Assembly of Experts, has to pick a leader that he'd be satisfied with. Now, he said he doesn't mind religious leaders. He works with a lot of other religious leaders. Presumably, he's talking about maybe the Pope and the Orthodox Patriarch, not exactly like the Iranian supreme leader. But he says, hey, look, I work with a lot of religious leaders. So he's open to a religious leader, but he wants one that would be acceptable to him. And it doesn't seem like that's what Iran's picking. So does leadership matter? Is that one of the goals of this U.S. effort? And if it is the goals that Les has laid out, are we on the path to achieving them? Are we going to get there? How far away are we?
Yeah, I don't think who the individuals are matter as much as how much they are aligned with U.S. interests, right? If you look at the situation in Venezuela, I don't think this president and most of the administration, though not all. I think Secretary Rubio and others may have some longly held personal views, but I don't think they're particularly interested in whether or not there's a thriving democracy in Tehran. I think they're much more interested in whether Iranian policy changes, whether their nuclear profile changes, and whether they are much more, aligned with U.S. interests and stop funding proxies in the region that have created so much death and mayhem across decades. To me, Jamil, the particularly interesting thing is the regional nature now of this conflict, where you have the Iranian regime clearly in preservation mode, but sort of lashing out at its neighbors, as you've mentioned. They have very limited allies around the world and very limited allies in the region, and they chose to strike key allies, including the Qataris. But the Qataris have also been, as listeners to this podcast know well, leading negotiations, whether it's with Hamas or with Afghanistan or other key interests that the Iranians, care deeply about. They also struck the Turks, which was very interesting. Turkey is a NATO member. There was some discussion whether that could trigger an Article 5 response. I don't think any of us are expecting that, but they're certainly complicating the dynamics, probably in a desperation mode. But of course, when you take an action like the United States took in a very volatile region, these are the types of outcomes that are very difficult to predict.
Well, Mark, what about that? Why do we see this weird messaging going on from within the regime? On one hand, you've got the president saying, "I'm sorry that we attacked our neighbors. We're not going to do it again unless your facilities or your base, areas in your jurisdiction are being used to attack us, and then we'll come after those areas in particular." Why are we getting that kind of messaging from one side, and then obviously the military is doing something different? What's going on here? Is there confusion inside the Iranian regime? Is there a question of who the real leader is? Is it Mojtaba Khamenei? Is it the president? Is it this triumvirate of people, the president, another senior cleric, and the chief justice? Who's running the show here, and why is there this confusion out there in terms of what's being said and then what's being done?
That's a great question, and I think, look, it comes down to two things: one, the fog of war, which any conflict has, and another is the way authoritarian regimes like Iran are particularly impacted due to their structure and norms. Which, let's pull that thread a little bit. These regimes look very unified in peacetime because everything flows through a center of power. And when that center is disrupted through either wars or leadership losses, the system fragments. And that's when what looked like discipline actually turns out to be dependence. Authoritarian systems concentrate just about all of the decision making at the very, very top. So when these senior leaders are killed or isolated or communications disrupted, the system struggles because the lower level players are just not empowered to act independently. In fact, they're punished for doing so oftentimes. And they don't take initiative. So when the orders stop flowing, paralysis can set in, and then pandemonium. This problem is compounded because many of these authoritarians, including Iran, deliberately create overlapping institutions. They have military forces, they have ideological guards, they have multiple intelligence services. And this is to prevent any one group from gaining enough power to overthrow the regime. So in wartime, and we're seeing this play out right now in real time, these competing structures often have different priorities. They produce conflicting actions and messaging. I think the messaging challenges that Lester mentioned that played out over the weekend with the Iranian president saying one thing and the military and hardliners saying another is a prime example. So political leaders want regime survival. Military commanders want operational success. Ideological factions are demanding escalation or symbolic retaliation. The result is contradictory public statements and inconsistent strategy. It's not just limited to Iran. If we look at let's just look back in the last century, the last 100 years or so. We saw it in 1945 at the tail end of World War II with Nazi Germany coming apart. We saw it in Argentina with Falkland Wars in 1982, Iraq in 2003, where that centralized government and its military failed and fell quickly. And we're seeing it play out now in Ukraine with Russia. In the beginning of the war, the Russian intelligence service provided overly optimistic assessments to Putin and the Kremlin, leading them to think they could decapitate Ukraine and be welcomed as liberators in the first, couple days. You had different institutions, including the military, the intelligence services, the Wagner Group, pursuing overlapping and conflicting operations, and it resulted in having to push senior general officers closer to their front lines, which resulted in a shockingly high 15 Russian generals being killed in direct military action. That's in addition to about 5 that the Ukrainians killed outside of Ukraine. That's a shockingly high number. I mean, that's more than the U.S. Lost in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf Wars combined. And almost all of those generals were lost to accidents, airplanes. So to close it up, in closing, we're seeing the fog of war playing out inside Iran's leadership itself. When strikes remove senior commanders, disrupt communications, governments stop acting as a single actor. They get fragments of power, speaking at once, a president signaling restraint, a military promising retaliation, hardliners pushing escalation. It's not just political drama, it's evidence that the war is hitting the regime's ability to command and control their forces and their nation. It's hard to see how they're going to overcome that.
Well, interesting. I wonder what that's kind of what's playing out here too, because you have the president coming up with different explanations than what the Secretary of Defense is saying. You got Secretary Rubio coming out with different explanations as well. What the war goals are, what the goals aren't. The president puts out a Truth Social, and everyone tries to rally around that. And at times it gets a little confussed. So I think we might be seeing.
You're
a little
absolutely
bit of that.
right, Jamil.
Yeah.
And that should be maybe we'll do that Wednesday.
There you go. All right, well, folks, that's a wrap. Thanks as always to Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Wednesday, March 11th, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.